Welcome to Faith Vocals. My name is Faith. I started this channel to have conversations with folks about our beliefs. I'm a Christian. I believe that the Bible is true and important for our lives, but I would really love to hear what you believe. I'd love to have a back and forth conversation with you, if possible, about why you believe what you do and what maybe people get wrong about what you believe. And so if you're interested in that, please leave your comment downstairs. I'd love to read those. What I've been doing on this channel lately is what we call a Bible study as Christians, going through the Bible, in my case, through the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. And we've been going through some rather interesting sections as far as the culture of the Bible at the time described. So Genesis, very far in human history, near the beginning of human history as the Bible describes it. I'm what we would call a young earth creationist. Christians may have different points of view, but I believe that the Bible teaches that our earth is relatively very young, at least compared to the standard Western view that the world is billions of years old. I would tend to believe more like thousands of years old, like 6,000, 10,000, somewhere around in there. But going through the Bible, we're looking at obviously a very different culture that far back in human history. So that's been fun. Lately, we've been going through the story of a man named Jacob. Jacob was the grandson of Abraham. We spent quite a while on Abraham's account. He's a very important individual in the Bible, and Jacob is also very important. I think next week we'll get into the account of how his name changed from Jacob to Israel. And of course, if you know your geography, you know there is a nation named Israel. And if you know your history, you may know that there was not always a nation named Israel in recent modern history. It became a nation again after more than a millennia in exile. I'm not quite sure if it's 2000. I think it would just be the 1000, but centuries in exile from their land. So for centuries after it was first instated, and I'm oversimplifying a little bit, this nation ceased to exist, and then in 1948 it started to exist again, which personally I think is kind of miraculous. I think that in itself is good evidence for the Bible being true, because the Bible predicted this would happen, that Israel would come back to its own country and would not be able to be wiped out. The Bible says that Israel, particularly the city of Jerusalem, is the apple of God's eye, and he is very protective of his people. That doesn't mean that things always go right for them, but he cares about them very much. And we are currently in our study of Genesis talking about the first Israelite. Of course, the man by that name, Israel, would be the first Israelite. And of course, we are studying the period before he received that name. So the nation of Israel is a mere concept in God's timeless knowledge and understanding of the universe and of history. And so far in Jacob's story, let me see if I can quickly summarize what happened. He was born the twin brother of a fellow named Esau. Esau was the firstborn, so naturally he would get double the inheritance when his father Isaac passed away. Jacob was able to trade with Esau for that right, what was called the birthright in the Bible. That's the word used for that. Esau was a hunter, and so he went out hunting, came back empty-handed, exhausted, starving, saw Jacob cooking a stew, and Jacob used that opportunity to get him to trade his birthright, which fits in with a prophecy that was made at Jacob's birth. Of course, with two twins, the mother was very distressed. Rebecca was very distressed, did not know what was going on. Why was this labor so difficult? Was she going to die? So she inquired of God, and God reassured her that she had twins. The older would serve the younger. And so she always had that prophecy in the back of her mind. And it so happened that that Jacob was able to get Esau's birthright. So that put him in a good position regarding the family inheritance, but it didn't really put him in a position of power. Esau is still the older son, and Esau still is his father's favorite because Isaac was partial to venison. So when Isaac was, excuse me, when Isaac was getting old, getting ready, thinking I could die any day, I better get my affairs in order, he called Esau to give him his final blessing. And in this period in the Bible, what we see is that the blessings seem to be really effective. I don't know how effective you find blessings in your day-to-day living, if you tend to perceive that someone blessing you is effective for you, or you blessing someone else has any effect. If so, then praise the Lord for that. There are accounts of blessings in the Bible that seem to come true. There are accounts of curses in the Bible that seem to come true. I don't just mean the swearing. I mean proclamations that are negative about someone's future, that they seem to be effective. So naturally, if Isaac is going to bless Esau, we would expect that blessing to come true. Isaac told Esau, go hunt some food like I enjoy eating. You prepare that for me and I'll get you your blessing. Well, Isaac's wife, Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esau, overheard, and that prophecy is still in her mind. She's thinking, I'd better get Jacob in there. And so she had Jacob disguise himself like Esau, which wasn't too terribly hard because Isaac was losing his sight. He was blind at that time. However, it wasn't too terribly easy because Isaac was a clever fellow and he was able to identify something's wrong about this individual. But they had fitted Jacob up with goat skins on his arms, had him wearing Esau's clothes. So Isaac's going, it feels like Esau, it smells like Esau, kind of sounds like Jacob, but everything else seems right. And so he gave Jacob the blessing, which was that the person receiving the blessing would rule over his brother. So I don't know if Rebekah had just never told Isaac about the prophecy, or if Isaac just preferred Esau to be in charge, didn't maybe trust his wife. I don't know what the situation was. There are times in the Bible, I think it's interesting, God chooses to give the truth about the future. I'm trying to remember if this account was part of last stream. I took a side story. I think it was last stream. If you go back there and can't find it, then maybe it was something that I was preparing, something I was thinking about. But there's an account in the Bible where a king was ill, and this king was not a friend of God, but hearing that there was a prophet of God in the region, he went ahead and sent one of his people to ask this prophet, am I going to die of my illness? So the person, if I'm remembering right, I think his name was Hazael. He went to inquire of the prophet, will my king survive? And the prophet told him, God has revealed to me. He told him, you tell the king that he will survive, but God has revealed to me that he will not survive. And then the prophet was distressed because he revealed to this man Hazael that Hazael was going to wreak terrible wrongs against Israel, to the point of destroying pregnant women, probably in war, just atrocities. That was part of the revelation that God had given this prophet about this circumstance. So Hazael asks a question, is my king going to die? And he comes away with the answer, tell the king that he will live. He will not live. You're going to do terrible things to Israel. So he decides on his own to smother the king. He tells the king, you're going to live. And then when he has an opportunity, I'm trying to remember, I think I forgot this the last time too, but I believe it was smothering the king, but I may be mixing up some of my stories. Long story short, Hazael kills the king. So God did not reveal to Hazael that he would kill the king. It was up to Hazael to put those pieces together. Hazael had every opportunity not to kill the king, given the way that God had revealed it. However, God did reveal the truth that God revealed the truth that the king would die and that Hazael would do terrible things. And if this man would kill the king while he's sick, then surely he is the type of man who will do terrible things against the nation of Israel. So I see these things in the Bible, and I kind of had scratchers because I kind of wonder, God, if you hadn't given the prophecy, that Jacob would rule over Esau, then there would have been no deception on Rebekah's part, right? She wouldn't be trying to help Jacob to rule over Esau. But then again, that also, later on in history, we see several things happening as a result of this moment because of that deception with Jacob and Rebekah against Esau and Isaac. Because of that deception, there's this whole chain of events that happens that really influences the whole world for, I can't imagine anything better that could occur than that the deliverer who was promised from on the same day that Adam and Eve sinned, that the deliverer who was coming to crush the serpent's head, according to that first promise that God gave us, I can't imagine anything better than that he should arrive and be able to save us from our sins. And that would not have happened if Rebekah and Jacob had not convinced Isaac that Jacob was Esau. Now, does that make that deception right? No, that was a sin. And God never told Rebekah to deceive Isaac. God never told Jacob to play a part in that. That is clearly the wrong behavior. And the Bible tells us in the book of James, it's late in the New Testament, that God does not tempt us to sin. And in both those cases, both of the stories that I mentioned, the one with Rebekah and Jacob, the one with Hazael, God did not plant the idea in these people to sin. They planted their own idea. Hazael had to put two and two together. And if I would like to think in his situation, I'm not the type of person who would think of murdering someone, who would consider murdering someone. So if you gave me those details, God probably wouldn't give me those details because I would not have killed the king. And so I would not be in a position to cause harm to God's people. There's a lot of places in the Bible where it's easy for us reading it to say, oh, I wouldn't have done that. In reality, say, for instance, the nation of Israel going on their way to the promised land through the desert, complaining, being a real thorn in God's sight. I'm going to use the phrase, but not that we could give God any true we're like gnats compared to God. Calling us gnats compared to God is even too generous. We can do no harm to God, but the nation of Israel was clearly raising God's ire with their complaints as they're going through the desert. And very many times us Christians reading about this will say, oh, if I had been going through that, I would have trusted God. I wouldn't have complained. No, we complain about stuff all the time. I'm an American. I've heard someone say that complaining is an American pastime. So it's easy for us to read ourselves better than the stories that are in the Bible, and I want to be careful about that, but I really do think that I would not have considered murdering a king. I might have come closer to considering a deception in order to put my son into the position of a prophecy that God told me he's going to rule, and if he doesn't get this blessing, he's not going to rule. I think that would have been maybe something closer in my character, though it's hard for me to imagine even having the initiative to do that personally. But anyway, I was trying to summarize. I was trying to go quickly, so I'll get back on track here. Jacob does commit this deception, the sin against his father, and when Esau finds out that Jacob took his blessing, because Isaac can't tell Esau, oh, I bless you to rule over your brother too. No, he already gave Jacob the blessing to rule over Esau. How can both of them rule over each other? It doesn't work. So Esau misses the chance to get the blessing. He's fit to kill. He is ready to kill Jacob. So Jacob had to flee his home. Rebekah knew he was fleeing. From what I can tell, Isaac didn't know he was fleeing. She made an excuse for him. She wanted him to marry someone from her own culture, not someone from the Canaanite culture, which was showing evidence of wickedness, was certainly not a God-fearing culture. And so she then tells Jacob, go find my brother's house, marry one of his daughters, and you'll get set up. And then when Esau settles down, I'll let you know that it's safe. And so that's what Jacob does. He runs to Haran. It's a long trip. In Haran, he finds her brother Laban, so his uncle Laban. He finds that Laban's daughter Rachel is very pretty, and he's willing to work 7 years for the privilege of marrying Rachel. And if you're thinking his uncle's daughter would be his cousin, that's a little bit, yeah, they did marry closer in relation back then than we would consider acceptable now. Later on, when Israel established the law, the Bible did make some delineations. It did set some boundaries between who could marry who. But early on in the world's history, they were discovering this over time. So when Adam and Eve had their children, Seth was the son that is the ancestor to all of us, according to the Bible. Seth had no one else available to marry than one of his sisters. That's just the way the human tree worked at that time. But Adam and Eve were made genetically perfect, and so they had no bad mutations to pass on to their their daughters. And so there were no negative mutations to get spread on by inbreeding. Later on, that became a problem as we live in a broken world, and those mutations are a part of the process, but they accumulated over time. So back on track. We're going back to talking about Jacob. He was with his uncle Laban. He wanted to marry Rachel. He worked 7 years. He's about ready to marry Rachel. The wedding goes swimmingly. The wedding night goes swimmingly. Jacob wakes up and gets his first real glance at his wife without her bridal veil on, and it's not Rachel. It's her older sister, Leah, who has weak eyes, and she was definitely not the one that Jacob loved. Laban had pulled a switcheroo and had traded Rachel for Leah, and now Jacob finds himself married to Leah, and he wanted to marry Rachel. So he talked to Laban about it. Laban explained, we can't marry off the younger child before the older child. It's just not done here. And so Jacob works another 7 years. He gets to marry Rachel, and he's working off another 7 years for the privilege of marrying the gal he already worked the 7 years for, but I guess he's working off the 7 years for Leah now. He has some kids, and then he's about ready to leave, and like Laban, as we discussed last week, Laban says, please don't go, because I'm actually doing really well with you taking care of my flocks. What can I give you to convince you to stay? And Jacob says, I'll work for you 7 more years, and in return, you give me all of the spotted sheep that are born over that time. And Laban says, okay, that sounds good. I like that. And then he moves all of the spotted sheep in his flock 3 days away. So now all the sheep that Jacob gets to take care of are the white sheep. So you can see genetically where this looks like it might be going. But according to the passage we read last week, God was blessing Jacob because God had already promised Jacob, because he's an offspring of Abraham, and God had made the promise to Abraham that His offspring would claim the land of Canaan as their land in the future. Jacob is Abraham's chosen offspring, chosen by God, which ties back to that prophecy that God gave to Rebekah. So God tells Jacob, "I'm with you, and I'm blessing you, and so for the sake of Abraham, I'm blessing you." And so, true enough, these white sheep that Jacob was given are breeding spotted sheep for him. And especially when the strong sheep are breeding, they're breeding spotted offspring, which means they're Jacob's. So that works great for Jacob, and he's working these 7 years. And now we're going to go ahead and jump in. I'll go ahead and pull up the actual words of the prophet. Of the passage, the Bible passage. Because I'm not a prophet, so I prefer to stick with the scripture and make sure that I have this all right. So we're jumping in kind of at the beginning of where we left the last one. Got a little spoiler up here. So Jacob, you're hearing from Jacob's point of view. And let me actually switch this to my favorite version for the stream. I had it to a different one, my study version earlier. So here we go. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, "Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all this wealth." Now Jacob hasn't taken anything from Laban. If anything, Laban took stuff away from Jacob, because he took the spotted lambs and moved them 3 days' journey away. All Jacob has gotten to do is take care of Laban's sheep, all of them white. And so those were not part of Jacob's pay. Those white sheep bred spotted sheep, which they agreed it was Jacob's pay. So this is not fair what Laban's sons are saying. Jacob has taken all that was our father's, but that I'm seeing a trend. We'll see it further in the passage. Laban is the kind of a man who's a forward-thinking man. He counts his eggs before they're hatched, and that's why he took all of the spotted sheep away. If he took all of those away, and then he gave Jacob only white sheep, then surely Jacob would only breed white sheep. He'd only be breeding more flocks for Laban, and nothing would be taken from Laban, right? Seems like if we were playing a game, like a board game, Laban doesn't seem like the kind of guy I'd want to be playing a board game with. Hates to lose, as we'll see. But and a cheater, by the way, as we've already seen. So Jacob is hearing the sons of Laban saying, "Jacob has taken all of our father's wealth. From what was our father's, he had gained all this wealth." And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. I did read some of this last week. We're still coming back to where we were so we can get a running start. In the version I use for studying, I like the way it describes this. "And Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before." If you're not familiar with the King James Version, countenance is another word for face. So Jacob is noticing when he is looking at Laban, when Laban's regarding the flocks that Jacob is taking care of, when they meet eyes, I've got a couple of things. A memory is coming to mind too. There's this scowl. And maybe it's an unguarded scowl. Maybe Laban can cover it over, but Jacob saw that scowl. I had an incident once where I was telling someone about what I believe as a Christian. It was just a brief encounter on an elevator. It was one of those moments where you're being friendly and amicable with the one other person sharing this confined space with you. I don't normally do that. It's not usually the culture here, but in this case, it was agreeable. He was asking questions about something he'd seen related to my Christianity. And so I shared my beliefs with him, and for just a moment, I saw him do this, and then he smiled really big. And I knew that I had gotten to see kind of under the mask that he was wearing, the really big smile that was not sincere, and it was the eye roll that was sincere. So I imagine Jacob is having these encounters with Laban where if Laban is trying to hide it at all, which I imagine he would be, But Jacob is seeing just for that moment the real side of Laban is he's counting all the sheep that he does, all of the sheep that he does not own, that he thought he should. So Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. And then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So when Jacob left his home, his mother Rebekah said, I will send to you and let you know when Esau is not ready to kill you anymore. And he's not getting the word to go home from his mother. He's getting the word to go home from the Lord, which is a privilege to have God talking to you and giving you information. But it's kind of a sad statement too, because already when he left home, Isaac was so old, he was considering, I could die any day. I don't know how long I'm going to live. That's why he wanted to bless Esau with his final blessing. And so I'm sure as Jacob was leaving home, he's thinking, I may never see my father again. And so it's just a sad detail to me that Rebekah is not the one telling Jacob, everything's well, you can come home. I think it is reassuring that the Lord is specifically telling Jacob, return to the land of your fathers. So this is the Lord's will that Jacob goes back home. It's not just his own idea, because he is in a really difficult situation. Laban's trickery regarding him is abusive, as we'll see in a bit. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. Now we see a little bit, we've seen a little bit of this description of how Laban has changed Jacob's wages. First, Jacob was supposed to be able to marry Rachel, and Laban switched her out for Leah. So that was a wage change, we'll say. And then Jacob has the right to raise the spotted sheep for himself, except Laban takes all of the spotted sheep away, so that diminishes Jacob's chances. So that was certainly a wage change, but apparently there's more than that. If he's saying 10 times, and in that culture, that language style, I would not be surprised, especially use of a fairly round number like 10. I would not be surprised if it's not an exact count. It's not exactly 10 times. It could just be saying many times. But I would suspect that there have been conversations between Laban and Jacob that we're not getting perfectly described for us in the Bible. So I would presume that it's not just the switching of the wives and the leaving only the white sheep to Jacob that were where Laban is showing his trickery. I think there have been these conversations where he's saying, I changed my mind. You're going to have this type of sheep to raise now. And as we'll go on here, it says, if he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. So that wasn't real life in the beginning when Jacob was raising Laban's flock. And by the way, the Bible tells us in the previous chapter that when Jacob received the spotted lambs, goats, sheep from the flock, he moved them into his own flock. He kept them away from Laban's flock. So as far as you can tell from Laban's flock, all of the goats and the sheep and everything are white. Throughout the time that Jacob is raising the sheep, during the 6 years that Jacob was raising these sheep. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. That would not have been real life the way that Laban arranged the situation, but God is clearly showing Jacob something here. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. And I said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see all the goats that make with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. So I think this is interesting wording here. He says, the angel of God said to him, and yet the angel of God says, I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land, and return to the land of your kindred. So we've got this angel saying that he is God, which, if this were what we understand an angel to be, which is a spiritual being who should be in the service of God, we would take this to be what's called blasphemy. An angel should not be claiming to be God. They're two separate entities. So in heaven, that would not be permitted. God would be punishing that angel for blasphemy. And yet we see earlier on here, let me go back to, then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and your kindred, and I will be with you. So the Lord is telling Jacob the same thing this angel did, go back home. And Jacob is attributing his blessing to God because of what this angel is saying. There are times in the Bible, many times like this, where someone called the angel of the Lord, or in this case, the angel of God, I think in one place, the captain of the Lord's army, where an angel will go to give a message to a human being. And oftentimes, the wording that the angel is using is really strange, such as saying, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. It is not appropriate for an angel to be claiming to be God. Here we use the capital G to indicate that it is actually God Most High who is talking to Jacob. But we see these places in the Bible where the angel of the Lord makes these pronouncements and apparently doesn't suffer for making these pronouncements. So there are many Christians, and I would give credibility to this. I think, especially in this situation, it makes sense. Who say the angel of the Lord here is the word angel. If we go to the Hebrew here, in Hebrew that word is malak, and the meaning of malak is messenger. So yeah, we use the word angel. Actually, I think angel is a word in Greek that would also mean messenger. I'm not going to chase that down, so fact check me if you want to. But the operative word here is messenger. And I've mentioned before, there are other places where the word messenger, angel, is malak, where in Hebrew the word malak is used of a human, someone who's clearly human. So the messenger of God said to me, and then this messenger is saying, I am the God of Bethel. Well, as Christians, we understand God to be a trinity, one entity, three persons, and so it's something that I think as humans, it's impossible for us to accurately, fully comprehend. This is a being that us humans have never seen before. We often get it wrong, thinking that maybe it's one person who maybe has three different personalities or three different roles, or maybe it's three different people who all act as one God or something. And I think all of those ways of understanding the Trinity are wrong. So I'm not going to try to get into the best way to understand it because, frankly, I'm a little bit foggy on that. I just, my best explanation is one entity, but three persons, and try to follow the Bible as closely as you can, as we can, trying to understand what that means. We know that one of those persons is God the Father. Another person is God the Son. We also call him Jesus, the Christ. We have God the Holy Spirit. So those are the three persons of the Trinity. And so many Christians believe that when the messenger of God is claiming to be God, that's because he's part of the Trinity. And we would say that That person of the Trinity would be the second one, God the Son, Jesus. Jesus was born long after this period as a human being. He was born to Mary and Joseph. If you're familiar with the Christmas story, as the Bible tells it, if you're familiar with the nativity scenes that sometimes show up around Christmas, then you may be a little bit familiar with the account of his birth. But Jesus being God, Jesus is timeless. Jesus is not confined to our timeline. So Jesus exists before he received a physical body when he was born. And so Jesus is able to have interaction with humanity, which it makes sense that he would, because he became human. So he walked among us. He was God's messenger to us for 33 years when he had a physical human body on this earth. So it makes sense that he would still be holding this messenger position even before the time that he received that body. So here's this angel telling Jacob, operative words to Jacob, what Jacob is understanding from this message. God has been blessing him. Now arise, go out from this land and return to the land of your kindred. Time to go home. So he's telling his wives, what are they going to think? Because Laban is their father, right? He's their, and Jacob has been there in their father's home. So they've always been close to Laban. What are they going to think about leaving Laban? Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us and has indeed devoured our money, because they know how Laban thinks. Laban has been thinking, I'm going to get 7 years of service if I just marry off my daughter Rachel. But I'll get 7 years more if instead of Rachel, I marry off Leah. And then I can marry off Rachel and get another 7 years of service. And then because my nephew Jacob wants to build up his wealth, wants to establish his family, I'll get 7 years more of service for him trying to provide for his wife and children. So that works out for me too. So last week I wasn't quite understanding where they're saying he had sold them. It didn't look like an exchange of money in order to receive them, but it wasn't necessarily an exchange of money. It was an exchange of Jacob's time, his hire. He had given his daughters away in order to hire Jacob, which certainly seems transactional, doesn't seem very like a very loving mindset. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. So they're not thinking very well of Laban. Laban has not been treating their husband very well, and by proxy has not been treating them very well. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Padan Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. I'm guessing Padan Aram might be the name of the country. Abraham originally came from this area, and the Bible calls Abraham a wandering Aramean. So that would probably be where he gets that title from. And then the city where Laban lived was Haran, which, by the way, was named after a deceased brother of Abraham. So Jacob is taking his wives and his sons away on camels. He's driving away his livestock. He's acquiring all of his possessions and leaving. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, the ones he had probably taken away from Isaac, all the spotted ones that Laban was keeping in a separate herd 3 days away, by the way. So that gives you an idea of how long it's going to take him to realize what's gone on. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. Now, to me as a Christian reading the Bible, this is kind of weird to me. This is what tells us that Rachel maybe she knows God through her husband Jacob. Certainly she and Leah were saying that God had given Laban's wealth to Jacob. They were acknowledging God's existence, but definitely doesn't have a what I would call a biblical view of God, which makes sense because at this time there was not a Bible. The earliest books of the Bible were written by Moses, and Moses was born a considerable time after this. And so she's got a kind of mixed understanding of God and deity and idols. For all I know, she thinks she can use one of these idols to worship the God of Jacob, or perhaps she's just attached to the gods of her father also. So this is weird to me as a Christian, because I'm brought up to believe that there's only one God, and he won't ever be pleased with sharing his glory with any other deities, because there are no other true deities. I do believe that there are fallen angels, also called demons. In other words, these are angels who served God, but who rebelled against God, who were inspired to rebel against God by Satan when he rebelled against God. And so these demons may put on the guise, may act like false gods, but they are false. They're not actual gods, they're pretenders. And so if there is anything that looks like deity, anything that looks supernatural, but it's not ascribed to the God of the Bible, also known as Jehovah or Yahweh, then that would not be the act of a true God. That would be the act of a demon. It would be demonic. So I don't quite remember what led me into that track, just a explanation of how Christians might see false gods. I don't know if Rachel thought any more of the gods than that they were stories that she was comfortable with, because that was her her religion growing up, or if she had any belief in these gods personally, but surely they mean something to her. She is stealing these idols from her father, not something that Jacob had been planning to bring on the trip. It says, and Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he intended to flee. We got a footnote here. Sometimes these are good to look at. In the Hebrew, the wording is actually closer to stole the heart of, and then we're going to see that in a couple verses later on. So, acknowledging here that Laban is going to be feeling betrayed by this. Jacob is fleeing without telling Laban. I don't believe that Jacob is actually stealing from Laban here, because all of the property, the wives, the children, they all belong to Jacob. It's just maybe he would be slighting Laban, and certainly depriving Laban of the things that are close to his heart, his daughters, his grandchildren. Jacob is depriving Laban of these by leaving without telling Laban. So Jacob is fleeing without informing his employer. He fled with all that he had, and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. Okay, crossed the river, and they're saying that this river would be the Euphrates. When it was told to Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, so again, 3 days distant with the flocks, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him for 7 days, and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. Now, when I was studying in the King James Version, it said Mount Gilead. So apparently this is a mountain range. Maybe it was a landmark that Jacob could set his eyes on and say, that's home. In that direction is home. So Jacob and Laban are now at Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night, and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. So let me just say, I tend to think of things in absolutes. I tend to think of things very literally. I think if God had come to me in a dream and said, be careful not to say anything either good or bad, I would be like, okay, I'm done. I'm just not saying anything. How can I not say anything either good or bad to a person? The best I can do is hello. That's not good. That's not bad. Maybe it could be construed to be good. I'm just done. I'm just not going to talk to the person. We're not going to have the conversation I planned on. And Laban overtook Jacob. So apparently Laban doesn't think the way that I do. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, And Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword?" And I think this word here is also like stolen my heart, that kind of thing. "Why did you flee secretly and trick me, and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs and with tambourine and lyre?" He's saying, I would have celebrated. I would have encouraged you guys to go if that's what would have made you happy. "And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' And now you have gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my good?" He's saying, listen, I understand why you're leaving. You don't have to tell me why you're leaving. I get it. You told me 6 years ago that you wanted to head home. But why did you steal my gods? That's the part I don't understand. So to me, it seems that Laban is skirting very close to the line of saying something that he ought not to Jacob. But certainly, I guess he hasn't skirted that line yet. I'm curious about this. Okay. The word "you're" here, that footnote is just making the claim Jacob is telling the whole family of Jacob, the God of your father. In other words, the God of Abraham and Isaac as well as Jacob. But why did you steal my gods? So we'll get down to that. Of course, Jacob doesn't know anything about this, right? Jacob answered and said to Laban, he's answering the initial question about why did you steal away secretly. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force." Laban hates to lose, apparently. "Anyone with whom you find your God shall not live." In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours and take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So I'm sure if Jacob had known that Rachel was the thief, then he would have done everything to prevent her from being killed. This seems kind of like on the one hand, it seems like a rash statement. Anyone with whom you find your God shall not live. On the other hand, later on, when God establishes the nation of Israel, he's making this nation from his chosen people, the Israelites, the offspring of Jacob. Partly so that this nation can teach the nations around them about what is holy versus what is unholy, what is right in God's sight versus what is not right in God's sight. And one of the laws that God institutes is that anyone who worships a false idol, that is a crime worthy of capital punishment. So they take that very seriously in ancient Israel. Unfortunately, the thing that destroyed ancient Israel, that led to their first exile under the Assyrians and under the Babylonians, was their idolatry. They insisted on worshiping other gods. Apparently, the law was not being obeyed, this being a capital punishment. This was not a deterrent to the nation of Israel, and eventually God sent the entire nation of Israel and Judah. It had split in two by then. And God judged both halves of his chosen people by sending them away into exile. And then later on, he brought them back. And then eventually they were exiled again under the Romans. And then they came back in 1948. So God does care this much about idolatry. Interesting that this is a similar kind of punishment both in the law that was instituted in Israel later and that Jacob is giving now. I'm not aware that God has been impressing on his heart that idolatry is a bad thing. Seems kind of like common sense. If there's one God that has been faithful to your grandfather and faithful to your father and is now faithful to you, maybe you don't want to go seeking other gods. But anyway, this is looking bad for Rachel, and Jacob doesn't know that Rachel has this God. So what's going to happen to Rachel here? So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two female servants, but he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. But Laban felt all about the tent, but he did not find them. And she said to her father, "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of woman is upon me." So he searched, but did not find the household gods. So she's learned some craftiness from her father, I guess. Is using a euphemism here. I'll let you figure that euphemism out. But it gives her an excuse not to stand up and let him discover where she's hiding those gods. Then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, "What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods. What have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and the sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night." So, definitely some hot words, I think justified, except Jacob doesn't know that Rachel does have the forbidden idols in her tent. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these my daughters, or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, "Gather stones." And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. So they're making an impromptu meal. I don't know if I'd call it a feast. It seems like it's more than just a meal. It seems like it's there to commemorate this moment, this covenant that they're making. I can feel for Laban, sort of. I think in our culture, we're kind of used to our kids moving away. In the culture of ancient Israel, very often there were multi-generational families. So you often had for instance, Isaac was 40 before he got married, and he was living in Abraham's tent for most, if not all, of that time. And so they would have been a close-knit family. When Abraham left his father's home and moved down to Canaan, he took his nephew with him. So he had a member that we'd consider extended family there living with him in his tents until their property became so great that they could not both live in the same region. So the ancient Israeli or pre-Israeli culture was such where you do expect these close-knit, more extended families all to be living under the same roof. Maybe there wasn't quite the expectation that on Laban's part that he's going to lose his daughters by marrying them off to Jacob. I still think he shows more possessiveness than he ought. Then again, maybe that's my Christian upbringing too, because I recognize that everything that exists, everything that I own, everything that I'm blessed by was created by God, and the fact that I get to be blessed by it is a privilege that he has granted me due to no merit of my own. If anything, I deserve everyone who sins and rebels against God is due eternal torment according to the Bible. That is the just punishment for us. And there is no reason that should not be going on at this moment in our lives as we're living, except that God is merciful and that God is love. And so God allows us to experience good things for for those of us who continue in rebellion against God, who don't seek God's plan of salvation through his son, Jesus Christ, our deliverer, then that the end of our life is the end of those good things. And then we go on to eternal torment, which is the punishment that God tells us in the Bible is coming. But God did provide his son, Jesus, to take our sins upon himself. Jesus came to earth as a human being, lived a perfect life, which no human being has ever done. Every human being has rebelled against God except for Jesus. Jesus died on the cross, which was a criminal's death. And in doing so, he took the punishment for sin that we deserve. It was an excruciating punishment. He remained dead for 3 days, and then God raised him from the dead, which demonstrates that his sacrifice was approved, that he was qualified to take our sins upon himself on God's behalf, to forgive us on God's behalf. And he took our sins on our behalf, forgave us on God's behalf, so he's the perfect mediator for us. And God was pleased with that. And so if we accept that, if we choose to follow Jesus, then we have, the Bible promises us Jesus' righteousness for ourselves. We have forgiveness from sins, and we go on to live for eternity with God in heaven, with Jesus in heaven, and continue to experience God's blessing and mercy and love. So that's the choice I've made personally, and would love to see many people, every person if possible. I know that's not the way it's going to turn out, but my goal would be that every person would choose to follow Jesus rather than go to the lake of fire the way that the Bible says that people who continue to rebel against God in their sins will be punished. Let's see. I again lose track of how I got to that track from where we were. We have this meal commemorating this covenant. Oh yes, I was going to comment on this because I think Laban is really skirting the line. I'm not sure how close he was listening to God when God said, "Don't say anything good or bad to Jacob." He was getting very close when he was insinuating that Jacob stole his idols, right? And then look what happened. His daughter nearly died. So she deceived Laban, and again, deceit is sin. I wouldn't say that she did the right thing. It did save her life. So I would say the whole situation is just bad. And Laban is definitely motivated by his possessive feelings, which I can understand given his culture. But as I was saying, my Christian upbringing leads me to acknowledge I may feel possessive about things. I may say, this is my thing, and I sure hope nothing bad happens to it. But everything I have is actually God's thing, and I don't truly own it. It's God who owns it and who has lent it to me for the time that he has allowed me to have it. So maybe that's why I'm not fully able to relate to Laban still holding on, possessing these things that he has given to Jacob, right? So why does he continue to feel possessive? But I recognize, okay, there's reason why he would be this emotional about it. So they've set up a pillar and this heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, which is Aramaic. It's not a Hebrew word, it's an Aramaic word, the heap of witness. But Jacob called it Gilead. So this is a Hebrew word, the heap of witness. Interesting that Jacob comes from the same culture that Laban comes from. And yet now they're speaking two different languages. There's this Aramaic word versus this Hebrew word. So it seems like maybe Jacob's way of speaking. Of course, Abraham was originally from Haran and then moved south into Canaan, has been living among the Canaanites. So maybe that has had some influence on Abraham's language, and then Isaac's language, and then Jacob's language. So I think it's interesting that we've got enough of a change that we're using two different words for this location now. Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." Therefore he named it Gilead and Mizpah. Mizpah means watch post. I've seen some other translations of it saying watchtower. For he said, "The Lord watch between you and me when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me." So I've heard that some people will make friendship bracelets or something with the word Mizpah out of them that say, "The Lord watch between you and me." It's supposed to be an idea that when we're separated from our loved ones, then may the Lord be looking down on heaven on both of us, and now we're not really that separate from one another. But that's not a biblical understanding of this word Mizpah or what this event was about. Laban is basically saying, "I can't tell what you're doing at a difference, but don't you dare harm my daughters. Don't you oppress them. Don't you take any wives apart from them," which I think is interesting because I thought they had no trouble with polygamy, right? It was Laban who decided to marry his two girls and their servants to Jacob, and yet he's saying, "Don't you marry any more women other than these." So, and Jacob doesn't seem to have any issue with that. So, I think that's good because I think more marriages would have been a bad thing. So, God is witness between you and me. So Laban is doing the right thing here. He's saying, I'm leaving it up to God to do right by me, to protect my daughters, and to make sure that you remain honorable with them. Then Laban said to Jacob, "See the heap and the pillar which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor," Nahor was Laban's grandfather, also the brother of Abraham, "the God of their father judge between us." So Isaac swore by the fear of his father Isaac, and so Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac, and Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country, and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. So that could have gone badly. Laban looks like he was fit to do harm. So it's a good thing that God intervened in that conversation. Still was a very tense conversation. There was something I thought was, I wanted to talk about. There are several places in the Bible where they talk about these inanimate or speechless objects being a witness. This heap is a witness. The pillar is a witness. Earlier on, Abraham made a deal with a king named Abimelech, and he set aside 7 sheep as a witness of this arrangement that was being done. I think they were intended to be a gift to Abimelech. So there's this concept that these inanimate things or these speechless things can be witnesses. I think part of it is that they're a reminder. Anytime these folks travel in this direction and see that heap and that pillar, they're going to say, "That was when we had that covenant." And it's going to remind them, we've got a covenant. I'd better not break that covenant. So I think that's what's going on there. It's not something very usual at least in my culture this day and age. By the way, if you have anything else to add on that, if you know anything else about that, or if maybe you have a culture that is more familiar with these kind of concepts, I'd love to hear from you downstairs in the comments. So Laban departs and returns home. There's just a little bit more that I wanted to refer to on the next chapter. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And this reminds me of an incident beforehand when he's running away from his home, running to Laban. He stops in Bethel. Earlier we got a kind of call back to God, that where the angel of God said, I am the God of Bethel. So that's the same location where Jacob laid down to rest for the night and had a dream of a ladder where angels were going up and down the ladder, and God was there and told Jacob that he would be with him wherever he was traveling. So Jacob is now on his way home, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's camp. So he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And I was trying to get the pronunciation of this correct. I saw one video. I was looking at this and I'm going, now I know in Hebrew this is a plural word, what means two camps. So definitely camps, this would be plural in Hebrew. And usually that kind of stands on its own. Im would stand on its own, so Mahanaim. And I was looking for confirmation that that was how to pronounce it. I found a video where there were all sorts of people calling it all sorts of things. Mahanaim. It was clearly Americanized and butchered. And finally, at the back end of the video, there was one man going Mahanaim, and I'm going, that just sounds more like the Hebrew. So I'm going to claim that that's the pronunciation. I think that's probably closer to it, because I know that this should be plural, and that's how these words tend to sound. Like the word cherubim, we've gotten used to the idea of the word cherubs. Well, actually cherubim is exactly the same thing. Cherubs, cherubim. And so basically these specific types of angels, these cherubs, which are not like the pictures that you've seen with all the little babies with wings. That's not a biblical depiction of cherubim, but we'll see reference to cherubim later on if we get deep enough into the Bible. I think at least into Exodus. I think there may have been a reference to them at the beginning of Genesis, but I'm not going to chase that down now. So Jacob has this encounter with these angels and sees that God is, I think this is God kind of reminding him again of that encounter at Bethel. Now Jacob is at Mahanaim. That's the natural way I would pronounce it. Mahanaim. And so he's got this confirmation. God is still with me. God is still blessing me. And by the way, tell you what, let me go to that Bethel passage here. I believe that was in Genesis 28. There we go. Yes. Here's the dream with the ladder. And the Lord says, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, which is exactly the same promise God had given Abraham, that his offspring would claim the land to the west, the east, the north, and the south. And in you and in your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. And then Jacob says, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he makes a promise to God. If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. So it sounds to me like God has been faithful. Jacob has more than just clothes. He has quite a bit of wealth through God's blessing of him. It seems to me like God is reminding him of his provision for him, and maybe of that promise that Jacob is saying, I will be serving God as long as God brings me back here. Well, God is surely bringing him back to his home. So that is as far as I want to go here. We see a little bit of indication what's to come next week. So I plan to be back and talk more about that next week. And thank you for your time, and God bless you.